Welcome to Thrivecast. I think this is our 52nd or 53rd episode. And today I'm proud to have Brian Sierakowski. Brian, tell me whether I'm not butchering your last name.
You got it. You got it.
So Brian has led many SaaS companies like Baremetrics and Team Password before. He's got an amazing product management background, and I see that streak in his LinkedIn profile every single time he's working with, some of the product company. He brings in that particular, penchant towards it. He's now a CEO of ChangeBot AI. He also mentors many SaaS CEOs, and that's how I found him. I found him through some other post that he did on LinkedIn, and I was just starting to follow him. He's also helping many other businesses communicate better with UI, particularly with ChangeBot AI. We're going to talk about it. So we're going to have a range of topics today, unlike the previous ones that we've had. We're going to have a deep dive into how to build SaaS, how to take over existing SaaS companies, and how AI is changing the game. Welcome, Brian.
Yes, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Brian, I think you and I we touched base about maybe 2 weeks back or something like that, and then the first time I saw you or heard you was when you had just taken over Baremetrics, and this is almost maybe a couple of years back. My memory might be slightly bleak on that. And you did a podcast on what was going wrong, how the ARR or the MRR for Baremetrics, had started to take a dip, just before you had taken over or when you took over, and the things that you made changes to it. So maybe we'll start off with that conversation today. So tell me, tell me the state of things it were as you were joining in. So you had a great product background. You had, I think, just sold Team Password, we were coming out of it, and then somehow you got into Baremetrics. So could you tell me the whole story of
Sure.
Why did you agree to lead Baremetrics? What was it that you liked and you did not like?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it looks like you have a penchant for getting into or trying extremely hairy things. So Baremetrics was probably one of them. So tell us the entire story about it.
Yeah, penchant for getting into trouble for sure. Let me give you a little bit of the background. And I don't know if I've ever shared sort of this story, kind of the specifics on this publicly. So you might be getting a scoop here. So you're right. So sort of the chain of events is I had built a product called Team Password, which was a password manager for Teams, not exactly genius branding there. And I built that up over many years, and I sold it to a company that was a backup provider, and they were kind of looking to create a suite of tools, basically. So because they sold to a lot of small businesses, and so their idea was like, well, we're providing them backup services, but when do you need backups? It's like, well, when you get hacked. Why do you get hacked? Because you had bad passwords, so that was kind of their chain of thought. And so I worked with them for about 2 years, and kind of the funny story is that we had done a big research project while I was there at the company, and between us, not like we're recording this and releasing it publicly, but basically with the research indicated that I had done there, kind of from a product perspective, is that there was a much wider opportunity for the business to just go after more backup, like instead of diversifying across many different services. So the research that I did basically resulted in, hey, it wasn't a smart idea to buy my company. So maybe that was worth the ticket price for them to bring me in and to learn that. But anyway, so we actually wound up selling my product to a private equity firm.
Okay.
And so the reason why I'm bringing all this up is because that's when I first got introduced to this private equity firm. Well, actually, technically, it's the second time, because I actually did try to sell my business directly to the private equity firm. So there was a little bit of told you so that I had of like, hey, I tried to sell you this business, 2 years ago, and now you're finally buying it. But anyway, so that was my first interaction. The private equity firm is named Xenon, and as I think it's pretty standard, you're an entrepreneur and you sell your business to a company, and you work there for 2 years, 3 years, and you kind of feel like you've seen everything, even though that's not really true, and you're kind of ready to dive into something else. And so through that relationship, I just had a great experience selling my business to them, in the same way that I had a great experience selling my business to the first acquirer. and they were sort of, it was one of those things that kind of like, hey, like let's keep in touch, because obviously we sort of have some alignment here. We sort of agree on certain things, and I was just really impressed with the team that I got to work with there. And so fast forward, whatever, not too long, maybe some number of months after that, and they had reached back out, or maybe I reached out to them. I don't know the exact directionality. And they're like, "Hey, we've got this new business that we're buying, and we think you might be a good fit for it. We'd love to chat." And so kind of the funny thing is, like, even from the initial outset of joining Barometrics, I didn't even know I agreed to come and work with them prior to even knowing what the business was that they were buying that I would be leading. And so that was really just off the back of the fact that I really liked the people that I was working with, and I thought they were doing cool things. And frankly, I'd always been curious about this private equity thing. Like, you hear about, they buy businesses, they have this playbook that they run, and then they just kind of like, magically create value and they sell the business for more money. And it had always felt like such a challenge, specifically with the go-to-market piece of businesses. I felt like I was better at building the thing, worse at the go-to-market. And so I was just really excited to see, like, what is this? What does this look like on the inside? What is this kind of magic formula that you can run that will, like, this is obviously not true, but, it's like they can magically grow any business just by doing a couple of these, like, secret, arcane spells that you can cast inside the business. So that's kind of the quick background. I'll kind of I'll stop talking for a minute to kind of let you guide where we want to go next.
No, I think that's beautiful. I think that's what I realized, that most people get attached to the people and not so much to the business, because the business can keep changing. And by the way, we have a lot of listeners, of this podcast, which are early stage SaaS companies or companies who are willing to sell. And if they are, if they're interested, please reach out to Brian for, PE from Xenon, and he can probably help you do the connection as well.
Absolutely.
But let me actually touch upon that. So once you said yes to them, they had already bought Barometrics, or were you part of the due diligence, or how did that work?
Yeah, I came in probably somewhere between 50% and 75% of the due diligence. So the purchase price was already discussed and the rough terms, but now we're really getting into the nitty gritty of, like, okay, what's going on inside the business, and all the standard DD things that you do of, like, well, are we correct about what we're saying? Can we, what are the licenses used? Like, there's kind of all these different weird, funny things that have to happen to actually get the deal done. So I came in and for the most part, it was pretty smooth sailing by that point in time, but there were a couple of, as you would expect, there were a couple of areas where people were kind of like, I don't know, or I don't necessarily. Usually the disagreements at that point are kind of like, hey, what you're saying now, based off of what you've seen, doesn't really honor the terms of, like, the kind of initial agreement. So that's kind of like that's the art form of due diligence of, like, yeah, we want to make sure everybody's getting a good deal, but we don't want to use, I think a lot of people will frequently use, on both sides, will frequently use due diligence as a reason to get a better deal, or kind of like change the initial terms that were agreed upon. It's like, oh, well, if I would have known this, I would have said this other thing. And so anyways, that was kind of like the very end of the process that I got involved with, of kind of running through, the nitty gritty, which was actually kind of nice from the perspective that joining the business and sort of you're doing, like, you're really, like, cleaning out the closets, and, you're going through, what are all the contracts we have? What are all the, how is everything set up? What agreements do we have with other potential third parties? What's the technology that we're using? What sort of issues do we see? It's like asking the developers, like, record a video of deploying the product to production, and where are all the servers hosted, all that sort of stuff. So it's actually kind of a nice way where, ordinarily, if you just get hired somewhere, you get some sort of onboarding. But I think it's probably, pretty atypical that you're kind of going all the way down to the floorboards of, like, like, what's every single thing, because the people that are, the founder was going away. Like, and I don't actually remember if there was any sort of, like, transition period. I'm sure there was. But, that's kind of the point of, like, usually when you're getting hired, it's like, not like you're assuming that everybody that's there now is going to go away. You need to know everything about the business. So that was actually kind of a cool experience. And I think, I don't know that, like, consciously affected the way that I think about onboarding a new person to the company, but I think it's kind of subconsciously change the way that I think about like how much context can we provide to people, and like what was my experience like going in basically with like an entire data room worth of information, that if I didn't load all that into my brain right away, but I had this resource that I could go back to at any point in time to be like, oh, let me go and look that up. So it really kind of influenced my kind of thought process of like what it's like bringing somebody into a company.
So you're saying that just because you went through the due diligence process, maybe halfway through, the midway through, you were able to find more closets, more skeletons in the closet, so you knew where the business was. So how did that help you in taking over? I know from the podcast, if I remember correctly, maybe you can help me recollect my memory. The business was flat, the growth was flat when you came in. There was a lot of bleed of cash flow, meaning you're not getting to cash flow positive yet. You had taken a lot of debt at that time. Your MRR and the internal cost structures that you had were not matching. So you had to go make some substantial changes both in the org, in the product, and start, getting to the right MRR. So tell us a little about what skeletons you found as you went through this, and then how did you go ahead and stabilize all of that? It looks like
Sure.
you eventually in 6 to 8 months time, you were able to go figure out how to increase the MRR. You had almost a doubling down of MRR in the next 1 year or so. So how did that transformation came into being?
Yeah, totally. And so let me just clarify a little bit. So the state of the business when I was brought in was, you're right, like revenues were flat but stable, but they were cash flow positive. And
Yeah,
so, frankly, the cash flow issues were all introduced by me in the effort of saying like, okay, well, if we're going to like, what is the version of this business that even has a chance at growing much more quickly?
All right.
And so the business was running fine, but I think that was, and this was the reason why I sold my business as well. You kind of get to a point where things are like either flat or they're growing a little bit but kind of not enough to be exciting, and you as the founder will look, and I'm guessing here, I don't know what's like what the inside of Josh's mind was at that time, although he did write about it extensively, so I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb, but I'd rather you just hear it from him directly. But I think it's kind of like, hey, like, well, am I gonna I've spent whatever it was 10 years with this business, do I want to spend another 10 years with the business?
Awesome.
And maybe if the business is doubling every year, you're like excited to do that. But if it's kind of just growing very slowly, it's less exciting. That was the case for my business that I sold as well. So kind of maybe I'm actually using Josh to speak my own feelings there. So yeah, so we when we came in, and I'll take another like quick step back. So sort of like the premise of Xenon at the time was that there are a lot of businesses out there that have had a lot of engineering effort gone into them, like built into them, but the sales and marketing effort has not kept up with it. And so that's just kind of the overall framing of like why Xenon thought this was a good company to buy, because they saw all this like amazing technology and they saw this opportunity. And at the time, the company had no people in sales. They did actually a fantastic job, and I don't know why I said actually. They did, and had done a fantastic job in marketing from a content perspective, but maybe not necessarily from like paid advertising. They weren't kind of going through multiple different channels.
Flaky, yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And they had a support team, but not necessarily like a customer success team. And so all those areas were the places that I looked to in order to to add all of the burn necessary to get us into cash flow issues. It's really interesting to consider a company like Baremetrics. The value that you're able to charge for the product is really directly correlated to the quality of like insights that companies can get out of it. And so what that means, unless you're going to manually interpose with your customers, you're sort of up to how skilled is the customer at using the tool. And if hypothetically, if the customer is not that savvy with how to kind of slice and dice data and understand segmentation, and then understand like take those signals from segmentation and then apply that to the business, then the product is just kind of a series of charts.
Yeah.
And that's just not that valuable. That's worth, whatever. That's worth like $99 a month to get this like, up-to-date version of all of your stats. But it's not worth a premium. And so that was kind of like the major theme behind, well, is starting with like a sales process of like actually as people were evaluating the product or going out and finding good fit customers and sort of like framing the conversation in this way of like, hey, it's like the thing you're always doing, but like you're not buying a chart, you're buying the outcomes that you can get through having this intelligence. And that was the same thing on the success side, because we could bring people in, and we frequently found that if the main person who used the product, sometimes it was just one person at the company using our product, and they're paying whatever, $1,000 a month. Yeah. And then, so that person leaves and nobody's there to pick it up, and they don't know all the different ways that they have it organized. And so now we lose a customer. So those were kind of like, that was a lot of the effort that I had put in, or at least the thought process that I had around like, okay, how do we kind of increase the amount of value that we're providing? And then, it's just as far as to speak directly to the MRR increase. There are those activities. I could not go without saying we did a big price increase kind of to try to match that value that we're looking to capture. And I was also doing this kind of during like early kind of, mid COVID as well. And so everything was doing well. So I think, all of these efforts sort of lead to having having an increase in revenue, and then certainly an increase, kind of, it's like, I made my own problem, right? It's like, well, in order, we need to have a couple of salespeople. We need to increase the channels that we're going in on the marketing side. So we need to increase our marketing team, and I need to sort of enhance this support team and also add a customer success team. And all of a sudden now things are really expensive. And I also did the thing that like, sort of like defies the Xenon premise of, like, we also need more developers as well. Like they usually hate hiring developers, because that whole point is like, we've spent too much time on software development. We haven't spent enough time on marketing and sales. But there was really the case, like we had done an acquisition during that period of time as well, to kind of, and we could speak to that a little bit too. But, kind of tide started shifting as well. We were, Barometrics, really the pitch was like, we want to improve your top of funnel metrics. And, the kind of other side of that is like, well, now people are worried about cash flow. They're worried about being able to pay their bills because, going through COVID and things like that. So that was kind of also like a big messaging and kind of positioning change that led to that acquisition as well.
Got it. So maybe taking one small step back, and we'll go to the next topic very soon after this question. Was that a good business to be entered in? Meaning, what Barometrics does is kind of revenue analytics or subscription analytics for, a sales-led kind of a motion, and I'm sure there may not have been a lot more competitors at that time, right? Nowadays, if you were to rebuild, a business with the same value proposition like revenue analytics, or would that be a good idea, or has that market shifted away?
It's always hard for me to say, because I talk to like founders all the time. I probably talk to like a dozen founders a week. And so I've kind of learned that it's a little bit dangerous to be like, because sometimes they'll come to me and be like, is this a good idea or a bad idea? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, how good of a job are you going to do at building the business? And kind of like, what insights do you have? And it was like, specifically, I think it's relatively safe to say that like if you want to do like a super broad category, like revenue, like, hey, I want to build a revenue analytics company, I'd be like, I'm a little bit concerned that that's just too broad to appeal. But like, it's the joke's kind of like, now that like, AI is happening, it's like, well, like what are kind of all the different tooling, like you're building all these like different AI tools, and like maybe it would make sense to have like revenue analytics from the perspective of like, how are you balancing your spend to these models versus your customers and things like that. Like, so figuring out a way that you can kind of niche in and kind of target it. I think that still to this day, even if there's like a lot of competition, if you're doing something that can make your customers more money, and depending on the sentiment of the market. So for a while there, we had shifted away from top of funnel growth to retention. and
Right.
everybody, like, they didn't want to, they were like firing their salespeople, or all of your salespeople are now support people and things like that. So you would had a you would have had a better time selling into, we will help you save money and we will help you retain your customers. Now we're kind of coming back again, and I think
Yeah.
people just in general want to focus on top of funnel growth is just way more fun. And unless there's like external forces, people want to grow top of funnel. And so
Yeah.
if you can make the compelling pitch that these revenue analytics will help you get better and sort of identify those specific areas in which you can find these trends, because it's so noisy. Doing anything with business in general, especially with kind of growth. And so if you can create a revenue analytics tool that can help kind of find, and it actually works, right? That you can find these lines that, like, hey, this is like a really high performing channel, or even finding anomalies. Like, you don't have anybody else who've signed up and paid for your product quite like this person. Like, you should check them out, because maybe there's something going on there. I think that's totally like, that seems totally legit to me. I don't know, again, I don't know, like, if there's that, if that's a sure thing, from a competitive standpoint, but I think,
That might be
yeah,
ideal.
this tooling is so important for operators. And, and as my experience with Baremetrics, there's kind of very few people that both have the vision to grow the business and also kind of like the technical data skills. So I think that's kind of the real bridge to create, of like, how do we, and I think that's what Baremetrics did best. It's just, it was kind of like a beautiful tool. It was easy to use, and people who are kind of founders and kind of, we sometimes found that customers would have other like their employees would be using some other platform, but the founder still wanted to just use Baremetrics. And
Right.
so,
Because it's beautiful, and
and it made sense to them. It was built in a mindset that, like, hey, as a founder, I have a couple questions or a couple of things that I want to get to, and Baremetrics attempted to make it easy to answer those questions. So
that makes sense. I think to the founders who are listening, if anyone's building revenue analytics, I think there are some really great insights, that Brian has shared. Brian, let me move to maybe the next topic. I know you've, after Baremetrics, you dabbled around, and now you started ChangeBot AI. So maybe could you explain to the audience, and maybe myself, I could be a customer to you, who knows,
sure.
On what is ChangeBot, and what was your inspiration for building, or at least thinking about a product around changelog. I mean, changelog has been, in my mind, changelog has either been a very developer-led things,
Yes.
meaning they will go do the, GitHub or Linear or whatever that is, create a changelog, put that into an S3 bucket or wherever that might be,
Sure.
and show up on some documentation. It's a very insidious place that, to keep it, nobody, gets to click on it. Sometimes you might pop up, within the product, but that might be it. But you had a very different take of using changelog, to I believe as a marketing tool to be able to showcase, the speed, the changes, and engage with the customer. So maybe outline what was your inspiration, and what are you trying to build now?
Totally. Yeah. I think just like most founders that, you try to get out of the game and it keeps pulling you back in. And so I did sort of the standard thing of, after I'd left Baremetrics, I spent a little bit of time just to chill, and I went to a programming boot camp again. So I'd done a lot of software development for Team Password and barely anything at Baremetrics. And so I did some of that stuff, and I kind of played around with a couple of different ideas. But my process is usually thinking back to the past couple of companies that I've run. What were the issues that I ran into that were really annoying, that either I couldn't even conceptualize a solution to, or areas where I looked for a solution and I didn't find a good one. And so that's kind of, I've always kind of just dog fooded. Every time I start a new business, I'm kind of just like, my kind of joke to myself is that maybe this company or product doesn't go anywhere, but at least the next time I start a business, then I don't have to worry about that problem anymore. Like we will have at least one customer in the future, which will be me if I don't, focus on this thing full time. So my experiences that led me to this sort of like product communications, changelog, product updates field is when I was I ran into a number of issues across the funnel at my past couple of businesses. So at Team Password, I remember vividly, we had this like large enterprise customer come in, and we weren't really suitable for enterprises. But we, for whatever reason, this the person that was doing the evaluation was maybe wanted us to win, or just whatever. They were just a champion for us, and so we went through the whole process with them. We answered all the questions and all the back and forth, and you joined the. It wasn't a Zoom call at the time. Maybe it was a Google Hangout or something like that. And there's like 12 people from their side and just me on our side, and we got to the end of this evaluation and they decided to go with another product. I think they went with LastPass at the time, which frankly probably was a better fit for them anyway. Mm-hmm. And the person that I was working with shared with me, like they had a big spreadsheet of like the evaluation criteria. Wow. And, we were in the top 3. And the one thing that stood out to me at the time, they were like, as an enterprise, if you buy into a product, you want to make sure you're not buying into something that's like going away or going to fall apart, or like, they want to know like, hey, are you funded? And there was one section that was just like somebody, not the person that I was working with. They were like, yeah, I'm not sure if this product's being updated anymore. It looks like this is like on like maintenance mode. Mm-hmm. And the reality of the situation, that wasn't the case. We were so busy building the product that we weren't taking the extra time to then publish all those changes out there. So, kind of that trade-off cost us a big customer. And then, when I was at Baremetrics, we did that big price increase. The first thing you do, you send the big long email. It's like, hey, here's all the reasons for it. People don't care about that. They want to go, a lot of people went straight to our blog and straight to our changelog to be like, all right, I signed up 2 years ago and now the price is way higher. What am I getting more for my money now? Yeah. And again, it was the same exact situation. We were so busy trying to fix bugs or improve integrations that we weren't taking the extra time. The rationale to yourself is like, well, we can either, fix 2 bugs or build 2 features, or we can build 1 feature and then spend the extra time telling everybody about it. Mm-hmm. But even at Baremetrics, we would have people cancel all the time because we were missing a feature, quote unquote, that we actually had. And, it kind of got to this point where I started to realize like, well, what's the point in building the features if you're not going to tell anybody about it? Yeah. Even from a retention perspective, people would just, I would see people just like, hey, like I'm canceling this just because it doesn't feel like this is going anywhere. Like I want to make sure that we're investing our time and effort into this platform. Like we're using it. And I just feel like I want to be on a platform that's going somewhere. While I was at Baremetrics, ChartMogul did a really great job of this. And in fact, I think it's one of the experiences, like they would do big, I'm going to be very biased with this, review. I felt like they would do these huge like press releases and pushes and blog posts and blitzes around extremely minor features that were things that we had already had. But wouldn't you know it, we would have customers that would cancel and go to them because ChartMogul has this new cool feature that we had already had. Mm-hmm. So, that is kind of like the mountain of like frustration on my back. And I was kind of like, well, how can we solve this problem? Because, it is just very difficult. And well, actually one of the first things I did was like, why is this so hard? Like what prevents this from being like really like easy to streamline? Like, can you just kind of like grit your teeth and get through it? And I have maybe we can maybe link it somewhere. I started to kind of write up my kind of like research paper on updates and product comms, mm-hmm. like product updates. And I started writing it and I kind of like didn't stop typing until we had 92 pages written. So we have this like huge, I'll give you the TLDR is that the reason why these updates are so hard to write is that it's usually unclear who at the company is responsible for getting this out. Is this a product responsibility? Is it a marketing responsibility? Is it operations? And the skill set required to get these updates out the door are really wide. Like you need to be technical enough to understand the changes, and you need to be close enough to the customers to understand like why this matters and what benefits this provides. You need a little bit of salesiness to be able to kind of like frame it as far as benefits. But you also need to be good enough at writing, kind of like that traditional like marketing content skill, to be able to write this in such a way that it's compelling and sort of evergreen, so that you can put mm-hmm. these things out there. And then finally, you need to distribute it, which frankly just takes time. You need to have a version that goes into sort of a one big list of updates. You need, some things should make it to the blog, some things should make it to social, some things should be emailed out. And so anyway, so that's my whole spiel on that. So when I was thinking about building a product around this, my initial thought was like, well, one of the challenges is that all the information is sort of spread across a business, especially if the business grows a bit larger. Let's say you grow to even 30 or 50 people. That's enough people that one person has no idea what someone else in the company is doing. And so the first idea was like, well, let's try to centralize all of this information in one place, all the code changes, all the information about what's happening, maybe even internal chatter. And then that way there's a single place that a human can go to and write the updates, sort of see the stream of information, compile it, write the updates, and put them out there. And that was kind of the initial version for a while. And then as we started working on this, it's probably about a little bit over a year ago today, is when all this LLM stuff started happening, like in a big way. That was like, whatever it was, 3.5 or something like that. So all of a sudden, when we started to take that idea and we're like, wait a second, if we pull all this information in one place, couldn't we have one of these AI models just don't summarize it for me, just write the updates for me? Like, it was kind of like the initial pitch is like, what if the changelog just wrote itself? And so that kind of took us down this AI path. And the first version of that, we thought it was going to be really easy. We could just take, all the information, like all the commit messages, and just send it to OpenAI and then get a big list of updates back. But we did that, and that sucked. It was terrible. Like, it was like we've had a group of beta users for a long time now, and for probably the first 6 to 8 months, the only feedback that we got from them is that these updates are not good. Like, I don't feel confident in posting them. And so that was really like the initial process of like, okay, how do we kind of learned more and more context was needed and more information was needed. And then there's just like a lot of product around it. Like the AI is kind of at this core, there's kind of a core AI loop, but there's like, well, you need to have all the integrations to pull the information in, and you need to have all the integrations to push the data out. And so, that was kind of like the initial process of like, okay, going through that maybe up until like Q4 of last year is when we kind of feel like, okay, we've kind of got something figured out that is like working, where we've got customers using it that are not simply responding, these updates suck. They're responding with all the other things that they want, which is great. And so that's kind of like the initial, that's kind of the quick recap on the arc of ChangeBot so far.
Yeah, I think, I resonate with you on many of these things. I've built 2 SaaS companies before, and changelogs has always been, short to say, an anathema into the entire SDLC lifecycle. Most of the times the developers would know, they would release something to production. There would be a change list. Nobody else, product management teams will not be able to understand that change list. So you will need to go deploy a person, to intermediate the engineering team, the product team, and the marketing team. And that's a very expensive resource.
Yep. Yeah, you have a meeting, and then the developers need to explain to the marketing and the product people what's happened, and the product people need to
notes, and they take notes, and then the marketing team would like to say that in a very different sense. They might want screenshots of the product. They might want to add some other color to it, right? Showcase that, hey, we want to add maybe a case study or a quote or a testimonial or some kind of a PR associated with it. It just takes a lot of effort, to get, these changes out. And I can't imagine that if you were to do this on a weekly basis, at least in my previous terms with various SaaS products, they were weekly releases, if not almost daily production releases.
Yes.
So keeping track of, hey, I'll not be able to go make it at a change basis, but I'll make it, maybe in the last 1 month, these are the things that we released it, and then have it given to an agency. And that's all we could afford to, and we would not be able to go take that in between. So it looks like what you have, what you're trying to go build, is that intermediary, reducing the person in the middle, which essentially has to collaborate. And by the way, we tried that as well. We took our, maybe 3-4 change logs, put that into AI, OpenAI, and asked that, and we tried to give that. It was horrible, and we gave up. We've also tried.
It's way harder than it seems. Yeah, we did the same thing.
Tried, some of the tools that I think you and I we talked about previously as well. Most of these are very static tools. You can go build a change log or /change log, and then you have to push various updates to it. It does not eliminate the man in the middle. So, compliments to you for thinking this in terms of maybe the first principles, that these are the core things that are needed, for you to communicate well with the customers. And I love the idea that you currently have. and maybe you've heard it on this call. I would love to try your product,
Yep.
right? And
Would love to have you.
all the SaaS founders, and we have about 30,000-40,000 odd SaaS founders. If you think changelog is something that can help you communicate the value of your product to your customers in the rightful way, there's Brian here, so we can get you connected there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think we've got a little offer we're working on. I think we'll be able to work up something special for the audience here. But yeah, I just want to kind of like just make sure that, because you're so right that this like changelog thing is, as soon as you say changelog, people either don't know what you're talking about, or it's like, oh, that's a developer thing. Exactly like you said, that's going to get thrown in some back alley.
Yeah.
Like we're not going to pay attention to it. And so I instead want people to think of like, well, when you're writing content, if you're ever in a situation where you're like, you want to put something out there, but you don't know what to say, and you start doing like, top 10 things that our target customer likes to do. We want to replace that content with really specific product content that only you can talk about, that your customers actually care about. Or just think, if our two companies are competing, we're in the same exact space. And even if you're doing a monthly update, you're actually doing pretty good. Like some companies are extremely infrequent and irregular in their updates. But let's say, your company is publishing one update a month, but I'm using ChangeBot. So we're doing like 5 updates a week. And so if, a customer goes to compare our two products, they're going to see, March update, we did these things. And then for your product, and then for my product, they're going to see like 25 updates. And so they're just going to start to look at these things. I don't want to prop up like bad product teams, of course, but it's almost hard. That one update that you put out there might be way more engineering effort and way more product effort, but it just, the difference is that in this hypothetical scenario, my competitive company is getting credit for every single thing that we're doing of importance. And if it was worth spending the time on, it's almost worth getting some sort of credit, out of it. And our customers are getting, maybe we're not sending them 25 emails, of course, but they're seeing these updates where it's like some companies, I make the joke that they send more invoices than updates. You'll send them a monthly invoice, that monthly invoice shows up on time, on schedule, every single month. But the updates kind of show every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks. And it's like, well, what sort of relationship does that create with your customers? That doesn't create a back and forth conversation. That doesn't make the customer feel like they're a part of the process. If you're updating them every step along the way, I'd hear from founders like, I'm trying to engage our customers, but they don't respond to our emails. I'm like, well, it's because you send them one survey email every 6 months and they never hear from you. They don't feel like they're a part of the conversation. So anyway, I care a lot about this, but it is kind of like, I feel like I'm doing like the snake oils thing. It's like, hey, it'll increase your top of funnel. It'll increase your conversions. It'll increase your retention. But, I do feel like there is kind of this very core go-to-market, pillar that a lot of businesses are missing out on because they're not taking full advantage of the work that you're already doing inside the product.
I think the core of this lies in building products has become a lot more easier now.
Yes.
Communicating the value of the product still is a very hard job.
Yes.
And generally sales and marketing, getting the value to the rightful customers is a much harder job by itself. I think changelog and changebot, it's probably something that should be leveraged. I see this happening a lot of time, right? So founder-led sales, mostly happens with changes. Hey, in the last month, this is what we did, and this is why we did it, right? And this is a success, and these were some of the failures. Those are the posts which will have the highest engagement. Yes. And those are the customers who are engaging with you at that time are the ones who are really looking at, solving those problems. So I think, you're probably on the right track on that. In the interest of time, I want to touch upon, now that we talked about AI, could you maybe share your thoughts on how you're thinking about using AI, for building up new businesses? I know you've built, Team Password, you built various other products in the past. Those were typical SaaS. Now that AI is coming in, are you building products differently today? Are you selling them differently today? Are you using AI internal to your teams to drive productivity? Maybe share your thoughts on how you think AI is shaping your perspective, and your company that you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll kind of start with starting a new product, and we'll kind of like work our way in. So from my perspective, I'm probably being too proactive on this, but it's been my observation already that if the major feature of your product is just AI, we're kind of already past that phase. And so what I like to do if I'm thinking about building a product is that you still need to be solving a problem for your target customers. You still need to be building something that's currently unmet need or undermet need, and it's going to make your customers more money in some way. That's kind of the crass way of looking at it. Like, hey, like we're here just to make our customers richer than they were before they found us. And so a lot of the people who sort of start with AI, like, okay, we have these AI tools, we have this thing. Now, what can we do with them? It is possible to find like a valuable business there, but I think that's less likely than just starting and kind of doing it the old school way of like, we're going to find this problem and then we're going to, build it out. And there's going to be some subset of the functionality that either wasn't possible before, or there needed to be a human doing some manual process. And that's kind of my favorite. That's my favorite part. And so like, Barometrics would be a good example of like, we deliver all this data, but it was up for a human to go and then check those numbers and then kind of analyze them and create a subset. So that makes sense to me of like having like a subset of like AI there of like, oh, like, well, why don't we kind of take some of that manual human processing time and automate that? Or with Team Password, we would have people that would go through the passwords and make sure that they're secure or make sure they're up to date or whatever. There would be kind of like doing a spot check on, hey, does everybody have access to what they're supposed to have access to and not, there's just kind of this like human ops time that needed to be spent there. And so those are the types of things of like, I see kind of AI existing as a core inside, like kind of like one piece of functionality inside of a business that would take a previously a human process and automates it. Or at least does the first pass on it. Like in ChangeBot, we, secretly our goal is to write the updates perfectly every single time. It's something that people just want to click publish on. But we understand that there are inevitably, especially as somebody's getting started, they're going to want to make some small edits. And so we try not to oversell, which is a challenge for me. But, we're saying like, okay, well, we're going to kind of create the first draft for you. And then you might want to go in there and edit some things and move some things around. And then we're going to learn from that because we're going to start to use your edited versions of these product communication, outreaches. And we're going to like use that to understand the things that you like and the things that you don't like. So that's kind of like when I'm thinking about a new product, I'm thinking of like, and I think it's cool from like an ideation perspective of like, what products don't exist just because there's too much human interaction in the middle of it that we just think that it doesn't make a great web product. It's like, well, what if we could automate all of that? I think that's like a really interesting product space.
Got it.
Kind of zooming out to like, well, what does this look like for an existing company or an existing product? And kind of like, I'll sort of use ChangeBot in that perspective because like you can go through, if you go into our website and you get, Control F, search for AI, you'll get a couple of hits, but that's because we use words with AI inside of them. So like, it's just very rare that we actually pitch AI as the feature. We pitch the outcomes that you get with the AI as the feature. And so I think that's like a really important distinction of like, if you are a company and you're going to add some sort of AI feature or process or workflow, I would just simply, and you can add a little, add the little sparkle icon. Everybody, it's kind of become like the universal AI icon. You're welcome to do that. And, I do think it is kind of cool. But one of the initial pieces of pushback that we've gotten on ChangeBot is people are like, you know what? I've used a lot of these AI tools and they kind of suck. Like they're kind of not very good. Like it's almost like a negative association at this point. So I think it's it's good to be very careful about that. And finally, as far as like internal operations, I do think that in the lightest sense, I think that like making sure that everybody at the company is at least like familiar with LLMs and like able to like use them to get information. And so, for example, at ChangeBot, we are a very small team and we've hired designers, and we've brought in people to kind of help us with some specific areas. But, design is like one specific area that it's like, we're just like not the best in the world at. And it's also really important that we get right because we're providing a very important, critical part of somebody's business. And if they go to the product and they feel like it looks silly or it's weird or things are moving around, that's just like not acceptable for us. Like we need to make sure that we're always improving that. And so, you kind of learn over time which models do better at which things. It feels like right now Claude does the best for UI questions. So if you're saying, hey, I've got this thing and this piece is overlapping here, can you help me with the CSS or whatever the case is? We'll try to fix it on our own. Like we need to understand how the software works, obviously. And it's always going to start with us, at least for now. But having that understanding of like, there is this additional resource out there that you should try out and see if it works. I've also used, one of the things I wanted to do is like, our kind of like current white whale is quantifying the impact of updates. And so one of the things I just did is I went to ChatGPT and they have their deep research product. And I said like, hey, I've got this company, we're generating more updates. And I want to see if there's any available research out there of like how much, if you are on the ball and you communicate to your customers and you update them frequently and consistently, what does that do to your numbers? And I got a result back, and I'm a little bit skeptical because it was so positive to like what I was saying. I'm like, did you just like take what I said and then you like spun the wheel for like 20 minutes and then came back and said, you're right. You're such a genius, but those are types of things where it's like, again, I'm not going to publish that research as like a white paper on our website, but it did list some interesting sources and some different interesting ideas where, maybe I would have spent a couple of hours randomly clicking around the internet, and that kind of condensed it into 20 minutes of background time, and then it took me another 10 to 20 minutes to read it. Like these are the types of things where it's like I think that it's good for people inside the company to get good at reaching to this in the same way that you are like everybody's good at Google searching. I'm like, I've been in tech long enough to where I remember when being able to Google things was like a skill. That was that differentiated you in the marketplace. If you could Google things and you knew like, oh, it's actually really funny to think now. Cause it's like before people would type full sentences into Google and you're like, no, you have to like quote this and you have to like do sentence fragments and things like that.
Right, colon and this and that.
Exactly. And now we're just full circle. Like, yeah, just ask now people are typing in all these sentence fragments into ChatGPT. It's like, no, just ask the full question, talk to it like it's your buddy. So, anyway, so that's kind of like my sort of like world view on AI and how you should use it both from like product ideation and creation, but also just internally as a team. How do we get the performance boost out of it?
Got it. So let me summarize what I understood from you. Pitching your product, has AI, probably is a passe, right? I mean, just trying to showcase that, hey, I have an AI feature does not help that much anymore. That was probably last year. This year, it's about what can you drive outcomes, and how can it actually benefit your bottom line towards it, right? So that's number one that you said. You mentioned about the using of AI in your internal operations tool. You mentioned 3 or 4 cases, I believe. The first was, can you help build a better UX, better UI, right? Example of Claude and other things that you mentioned about. Could you help build a better marketing pitch around the change logs, right? And that's another example of it. Probably write articles, do some research. Are there any other like maybe in a quick bullet point fashion 3-4 areas that you think you could use AI in your current SaaS company? You mentioned engineering, UX, UI, tad bit of marketing. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm no like immediate examples are coming to mind, but I imagine there must be a huge amount of operations and internal efficiency tools. Like, just like completely off the top of my head, like you could have like a model soak in like the previous days of Slack conversation and provide like a daily summary, or that we have all these like call taker tools that kind of everybody's kind of trying to find the space of like, okay, what are the action items at the end of these things? I just feel like there's like all these like operational benefits of like going through the process of like taking the thing that a human would have to take their time to summarize and put together, and just doing that automatically. And I think it's also the other thing too, just as far as like internal efficiency. I really like the idea for like internal efficiency, where I've seen it a little bit. I'm trying to remember who I was talking to about this, and I guess it doesn't matter. So I just keep going. But they were saying that they had somebody believe they were on their support team, and they had this issue where they ran into this thing, and the person had noticed that they had this one support team member that was like moving through tickets, or there's one task that was like really time consuming. And it's like, oh, like, how are you moving through this so fast? Like, they thought this person was just like marking things complete. And they when they looked into it, like, oh, this person like was like going back and forth with ChatGPT, and they built like a little like script. It wasn't like a full web application, but it was like, oh, I pull the data into this like, Google Sheet, and then I run this like macro that I created that ChatGPT helped me build, and it does like 90% of the work for me. And then I have to review the work anyway. So I just start with the review and I make the final changes. So I think those things are really great. And I think, in fact, at this point, better than like, oh, we're like releasing new AI technology to our customers, because who knows what again, we've put in like thousands of hours into just like getting the updates good and making sure, it's accurate. Like, how do you make sure it's accurate? How do you write a test suite for an AI tool when the response is different every single time? Like, you need to think about like evals and things like that. How do we make sure that this thing stays in a specific area, and it even more important that it's accurate? It's like, well, how do we make sure that it has the right tone, has the right voice? These things are like, you couldn't even write a test for that before, because there's some art to that. So I think that if you're kind of really hungry for AI, I would look for internal, systems efficiency first. And if you don't know what else to do, I would just sign up for ChangeBot and use ChangeBot, and then that solves all your problems too.
There you go. So that comes to a full circle now, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So maybe in the interest of time, Brian, could you maybe, I know you do a lot of mentoring with SaaS companies.
Yep.
Could you maybe take one or two things that you could advise? Let's imagine that you have about 30,000-40,000 or SaaS companies who might be listening to this podcast or either get an email. Any advice that you would like to give them on, if they are starting now, what perspective that you can share, that can be valuable lessons to them?
Totally. Yeah, I have two kind of topic areas that I feel like, especially at the very early stage, that I kind of repeat over and over and over again. And I think we've actually kind of hit on both of them a little bit in this conversation. The first thing is if you're starting something new, and it sounds a little bit silly, but make sure that you're solving an actual problem. And so a lot of people get fixated on a specific area. Actually, let me be more specific. So you're solving a problem that is experienced by other people, and it's painful enough that they're going to be seeking a solution to it. I hear a lot of different ideas around like, well, this process is kind of inefficient, or this is kind of annoying, or, I was, driving around downtown and I was looking for a restaurant and Yelp didn't quite work, whatever. It's like these types of things that are sort of loose. And I think generally that comes from a sense of there's this like entrepreneurial energy that people have, like they want to do something, and so they kind of just pick the first thing. It's like, oh, this ball I have isn't round enough, so my business is I'm gonna make a ball that's more round. It's like, what are you talking about? What are you doing? So the kind of very first piece of feedback is like, maybe spend a little bit more time on the problem. You can use the Brian Sierakowski method of looking back in your past of like, what issues have you experienced before that you were frustrated by? Maybe especially if you tried to look for a solution for it, you were willing to take money out of your pocket and pay for a solution that you didn't find. That's a great way to do it. But I would kind of start with that, and a little bit of validation on that too, just to make sure that we're like not totally off, because it's so much of the early stage, like like the stage 0 entrepreneurial pain is just trying to solve something that there doesn't necessarily need to be a solution to. And everything else is harder. It's that you're going to find it impossible to make progress because you kind of your foundation isn't strong. So that's kind of like point one. The other thing I talk about a lot is just how much effort needs to go into getting something off the ground. And you'll hear something of like, they're like, yeah, I promoted this. Again, I'm in a very specific spot. Like, I promoted this feature, and nobody came and signed up, and none of my existing customers used it. And I will say, like, okay, well, tell me what you mean by you promoted it. And they're like, oh yeah, like I tweeted once about it, at 2 a.m. or something. And I'm like, yeah, it's like very frequently, if you've done a good job at that step one, where you've kind of found a problem that's painful, from that point forward, provided you've built some sort of solution that kind of works, the biggest thing that you're dealing with is that nobody knows who you are and nobody knows what you're doing. And so you're just kind of fighting against like obscurity. And so I do this all the time for myself. I always need to be reminded, but it's almost always a function of adding one or maybe two zeros to the effort that you're doing. So it's like people will be like, I tried to get my initial customer, and I like reached out to people on LinkedIn. I didn't, nobody responded to me. It's like, how many people did you reach out to? Like, I reached out to a lot, like 7. I'm like, okay, so or 10. It's like, okay, take that 10, and I want you to add a 0 to it, and then I want you to do that every day for like 50 days or something like that. And then so it's like it's a little bit overwhelming for sure, but I think that's kind of like the people who, I think this is why there's so much startup content around being passionate about what you're doing and just like really wanting something to exist, having personal, like I kind of have skin in the game of like, I've had this, like I never want to start another business again without using ChangeBot. It's just like the thought just drives me crazy. Yeah. So like I kind of need to make this company work so that I can go in and build other companies. Like I don't want to be in the entrepreneurial world without ChangeBot ever again. So that's the type of thing where it's like, okay, well, that means that, like you said, you found me through content, and I try to post every single day, once a day. And the thing I'm thinking about now is like, how do I add in 0 to that? How do I get 10 posts a day out there? I'm doing like 1 video every other week. How do I make that like 10 videos every 2 weeks? How do I start to like add volume to these things? Because we're starting to hit these kind of key messages, and we're starting to, and when I first started, all I said was ChangeBot or changelog. All I said was ChangeBot. All I said was changelog. And, then through exactly our conversation, we're like, wait, like changelog means something different to people. Like, well, why don't we call it product communications? Why don't we call it product updates? Why don't we just not even focus on the fact that it's like a changelog thing? Why don't we focus on the fact that you're going to get a ton of marketing content out of this? You're going to get a ton of sales, and so now once you start to find those things, it's like, okay, great. You're sort of on the right track. Now do that 10 times more than what you're doing. And I find that like, it's exhausting, but I kind of like, I find that the founders who do the best job at the early stage are kind of like ready for that. They're kind of hungry for that. In some ways, they're even excited about that. They're like, oh, all I have to do is like email 10,000 people and like I'll get my first couple of customers. I'm like, yeah, they're like, great. Like they're just looking for some reason to get started. And so that's kind of, I think that the sort of the general, pick the right problem to solve, something that's real, and then like expend a unreasonable amount of effort, like something that no one else other than you, like it's kind of a moat. Like nobody else is going to talk about customer updates and product updates more than I am. Like, I'm sorry, like if you want to compete with me, you're welcome to try, but I promise you don't care as much about this stuff as I do. You don't have the scars that I do, and you don't like, and we're also having success as well. So that's motivating too. So I think that's kind of like I want to try to, if I'm coaching people or talking them through their issues, trying to move them into that space that I'm in of like, because that's where that kind of, that's going to get you over the hurdle of like, okay, yeah. And now you're going to, yes, you are going to post on LinkedIn every day for the next 7 years about updates. Like, are you prepared for that? Are you ready for that? And the answer is yes for me. So that's kind of, I think those are kind of the 2 big pieces of advice that I give in different flavors and different formats over and over again.
That's a super vibe advice, if you will. And let me summarize it just in my head.
Sure.
You just coined a new term. The Brian Sierakowski's method of looking into your past. Understanding that, hey, you had this particular problem. That could be a source of your innovation as well. Look behind in order to actually go forward. That's a great advice there. You also mentioned about talk to customers, add maybe 0 or double zeros to the effort that you're doing, reach out to more customers, talk about the problem, and maybe ChangeBot can actually help you, keep communicating about the problem, itself, right? Maybe right now it may not be, but what if, your tool, your product can automatically keep on posting it on your behalf on LinkedIn and other social media and small snippets all the time. So Brian, this is great. I learned quite a bit, and I hope that our viewers have learned this as well. Thank you for doing this, and really appreciate your time.
Of course. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Thank you so much.